Welcome to Grim Memoirs. On this episode, we'll be shedding some light on probably one of history's first known cases of a serial killer, a phrase that we are much familiarized with today, but was once a novel concept. The term serial murders or serial killings was first introduced in the 1970s by an FBI investigator named Robert Ressler. Ressler played an essential role in the psychological profiling of various violent crimes, and in the early 80s conducted several interviews with violent offenders and serial killers, in an effort to find parallels between these offenders' backstories, methods, and motives. He worked on homicide cases including Robert Chase and Jeffrey Dahmer. The term serial killings was originally used in the cases of at least 4 different killings that take place in different locations with a so-called cooling-off period in between. However, this definition raised a lot of criticism, and nowadays many scholars have adopted the interpretation proposed by the National Institute of Justice, which lowered the number of events to at least 2 different murders that occur over a period of time that spans between hours and years. Regardless, when it comes to the term serial killer, it is commonly known to have been firstly associated with the horrific deeds of Theodore Bundy. But serial killers have existed long before the term was even introduced or heard of for the first time. One of the earliest cases of serial killers known to date, without including here those from ancient history, is that of the Baron Gilles de Rais, infamously known as the real-life Bluebeard, posthumously that is. In order to try and catch a glimpse as to why he committed all those despicable acts he was accused of and executed for, we need to dive into his early life and the events that led to his murderous doings. Gilles de Montmorency-Laval, better known as Gilles de Rais, was a 15th century knight, baron, marshal of France, and also a brother-in-arms with Joan of Arc, and in fact fought together in the Siege of Orleans in the 100 Years' War. Little did anybody know, however, that de Rais would continue to lead a double life after his military service. Holding a secret so abhorrent and morbid, he would be sentenced to simultaneously burn and hang. Gilles de Rais was born on September 4, 1404, to Guy II de Montmorency-Laval and Marie de Craon. As a child, he was known to be intelligent and could speak Latin fluently. Little is known about his parents' death, but he may have witnessed the hunting accident that impaled his father, thus clashing him into his first encounter with death. Rais and his younger brother were placed under the care of their father's cousin, Jean Tournemine de la Junaudet. However, Gilles' grandfather Jean de Craon wanted to take them under his wing so that he could inherit their fortune, and also because he wanted an heir to his wealth. At the time, he was one of the richest noblemen in France. Jean de Craon was a dubious character, concerned only for his estate and wealth, and he attempted several times to marry Gilles with rich girls from wealthy families, until he finally managed to arrange a marriage with Catherine de Thouars of Brittany, de Rais' distant cousin, and they got married when he was 16 years old. During these formative years, his grandfather tried to steer Gilles towards politics and finance, but he had no intention to be successful in increasing the family's fortune. Instead, he would adopt a carefree mindset that their family was above the law and that he could do whatever he liked. Such was his approach even later in life, when he would forfeit his bank account and liquidate his properties to pay off debts and his opulent expenses. From 1427 to 1432, Gilles served as a commander in the royal army. When Joan of Arc appeared on the scene in 1429, he was assigned by Charles VII to watch over her in battle. The two fought beside each other in some of the major battles of her short career, including the lifting of the Siege of Orleans. In 1429, he was appointed to the position of Marshal of France, France's highest military distinction. At this point, he was one of the richest and most powerful men in France, and despite their war history and mutual service towards their country, when Joan of Arc was captured and burned at the stake, de Rais was nowhere to be seen. Says a lot about his character and nature, don't you think? After leaving the war, Gilles returned home to his grandfather dying. Before passing away, Jean left his sword and breastplate to Gilles' brother, a huge honor at the time, and Gilles was not happy about this, to say the least. However, after Jean's death, his fortune fell in Gilles' megalomaniac hands. He was quick to take charge of Jean's assets and was known to be very extravagant at the time. It was at this period, more or less, between 1432 and 1440, that his murderous frenzy began. During this time, he would kidnap, mutilate, molest, rape, and murder countless children. boys and girls included, basically becoming one of the worst child killers the history has ever seen. The victims were mostly peasant children that would beg for food at his castles between the ages of 6 to 18. He would lure them with the promise of food, a bath, or shelter, and some of them were even enticed to believe they were being taken on as stewards or servants. When the children would go missing, their parents didn't dare to question the Baron or inquire about the fate of their children. At this point, a delusional Gilles must have felt as a god, or the incarnation of law itself, feared by his victims and others alike. In many occasions, it is believed that Gilles would send his servants, Pourtois and Henriet, to kidnap children and carry out his horrific intentions. As for his modus operandi, it's as sick and twisted as it can be. As we've mentioned, he relied on his accomplices to kidnap the children, and then they would take them in a secluded place where they would be stripped naked. He would go as far as to tell the children he only wanted to play with them. Gilles then would proceed to hang them with ropes from a hook, sexually assault and torture them, and then he would order his servants to kill them, or he would do it himself, in a variety of ways, mostly with a short double-edged sword called a braquemard, which was used to slash their throats, decapitate, or dismember them. After killing his victims, he would kiss them and mutilate their bodies to admire their limbs and organs. Sometimes he would even perform necrophilia. After carrying out these despicable acts, then they would proceed to destroy the bodies, mostly by cremation. He was also deeply involved in rituals related to alchemy and demon summoning. Gilles believed that if he could summon a demon, it would help increase his fortune and maintain his wealth. He would often rely on a priest named Eustache Blanchet to aid him in finding a sorcerer who could summon evil spirits. He even made ritualistic offerings when he killed a boy, dismembered the body, and put his limbs inside glass vessels as a sacrifice to the demon, but to no avail. At this period, nonetheless, the disappearances of children around his estates weren't going unnoticed, and with the unrelated abduction and murder of a cleric on May 15, 1440, the Bishop de Nantes started investigating the Baron and exposed his horrific crimes. In September that year, Gilles was finally captured and awaited his trial for the atrocious crimes he had committed. The trial was a long, exhausting process of confessions, including that of de Rais' servants and his own, and also the testimonies of many grieving parents whose children had lost their lives at the hands of this marshal of horror. On October 25, 1440, he was sentenced with hanging and burning by an ecclesiastical and secular trial for various offenses including heresy, sodomy, and the murder of at least 100 children. To this day, the exact number of Gilles' victims is unknown, as most of his victims' bodies were never found, but it is believed the number ranges between 80 to as many as 600 children and maybe even more. The case of Gilles de Rais is undoubtedly appalling, and his ghastly crimes were never really punished in our opinion, even by an execution as the one he got. But the true nature of this gruesome sin that it is murder isn't something that can be explained or outlined by one's history or upbringing alone. Every venture of finding a so-called reason behind countless serial killers' doings is merely an exhausted path that bears no fruit and brings little to no remedy at all. The investigation is bound to start in the darkest corners of one's psyche, what plays amidst the sanity and insanity, the unspoken itch that exists in our human brains, the true actors that conduct our marionette bodies. Thank you for watching.